I'm Dr. Sylvia Peregrino, and this is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. I'm a government professor at El Paso Community College, and today I'm honored to have Ms. Yvette Lugo from the Area Agency on Aging, which is part of the Rio Grande Council of Governments, speak to us about what her agency does. Welcome, Ms. Lugo.
Happy to be here.
Ms. Lugo, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm born and raised here in El Paso. Went to school here, left, and was fortunate enough to leave to be able to go to college twice and came back twice. My undergraduate degree is from Baylor University, and my graduate degree is from University of Texas at Arlington. And so I'm a licensed social worker, licensed master social worker, and just happy to be back in my hometown making a difference. I think that was part of the just helping people understand, why would I want to come back to El Paso? And it's quite the opposite for me. It was like, why would I leave? I feel like this is my community where I'm meant to make a difference and serve.
And so how long have you been with the Area Agency on Aging?
It'll be 19 years this month with the officially with the Council of Governments. That's my employer of record. But the department that I serve, yes, I've started my work here with the Council of Governments at the Area Agency on Aging.
So 19 years. And could you tell us a little bit about what the Area Agency on Aging does and what are some of the services you provide?
Sure. Area Agency on Aging, there's actually several area agencies on aging across the United States. They're an organization or an entity that was founded out of the Older Americans Act. And the Older Americans Act, as you know, I'm sure, created Medicare and Social Security. And so that act felt that there was a need to provide a social services network for older adults in order to help navigate the systems that they might need. So area agencies on aging you will find across the United States. Here in Texas, we're one of 28, and we serve certain regions. So our area agency on aging is known as the Rio Grande Area Agency on Aging. It serves a 6-county region from here in El Paso County all the way out to Brewster County. So it's a very large landmass area, if you will, but the majority of population obviously is here in El Paso County. And so the whole point of area agencies on aging, as I shared, was to help older adults just navigate the systems and be able to maintain their independence for as long as possible. So with that, the funding that we receive, there are federal funds that come to the state of Texas that then are funneled to the different regions. And those funding opportunities that we receive either help provide direct services, and that's what some of our staff do, or we can purchase services on behalf of clients in the form of contracts through vendors, local vendors, et cetera. So anything from basic information and referral for what's available, how to connect you to those services, case management services to then assess your need. Prior to the pandemic, we would visit people in their homes and basically look at the person in their environment so that we can say, what is it that we can possibly help you with, and then connect you to serve as a longer term resource. Then we have something called benefits counseling, and that is specifically looking at people's benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, any of the other entitlement programs that people might need help accessing and apply. Those staff members just focus on our benefits. And again, with the mindset, if we can stabilize you by connecting you to the right resources, then you're pretty stable, you're pretty independent. We also have educational services, if you will, in the form of evidence-based programs that are looking at our health and wellness. And so those are some of the classes that we, again, prior to pandemic, we're out in the community hosting those. Now we're doing those by phone. So we're trying to modify that to make sure that we're still available and still looking at the health and wellness aspects of someone as we age. The premise behind that is that we want people to age well, to age better, so that perhaps we're not as reliant upon social services, because we all know there's not enough funding to go around to meet the need. Then we have a program that's very specific to our family caregivers. And of course, if you've ever cared for someone, an aging loved one, a parent, a spouse, it's not easy. And we know that oftentimes that caregiver is forgotten because all the energy is focused on the loved one that they're caring for. So this program looks specifically at the needs of the family caregiver in the sense of, what is it that you need to continue to do your job? Do you need a break? Do you need someone to help you with certain aspects of the caregiving job or duties and tasks? do you need education just to learn and understand what is happening with your loved one? For the example of, like, say, Alzheimer's disease or any of the related dementias, sometimes just understanding that disease process helps you then continue to do your job because you know what's coming next, or you know that this behavior is related to the illness, not necessarily something that's being done to you, et cetera. So those are also things that we are doing virtually, if you will, with our caregivers, meeting with them, talking with them, helping them to continue with their needs. And then we have the program that actually goes into the nursing homes and assisted living facilities. That's our long-term care ombudsman program. That is a heavily utilized volunteer program because there are several long-term care facilities here in our region, particularly here in El Paso County. So we only have 2 staff members, and through that volunteerism, if you will, getting people assigned to those locations. Pre-pandemic, obviously, we were in a lot more closer. Now there's certain regulations that are limiting the visits, but persons in long-term care facilities also need a voice, also need an advocate in case there are concerns that they have with regard to the care that they're receiving. So in a nutshell, those very quickly, the services that we provide. And then, as I mentioned, funding for services that we purchase. So back to our case management model, when we're visiting people in their home, or at least assessing over the phone as how we're doing now, we're talking about what is their need, what would help you stay independent, help you, if you had this little bit of assistance, to continue to remain in your home. So things like contracts with home health agencies to provide an attendant for personal care services, homemaker type services. Sometimes we just need help with our transportation to medical appointments. So we have contracts for that. Meals and food is a big thing for us. And so one of the largest budgets, if you will, that we work with is our nutrition program. And so contract with the county nutrition program that serves the senior centers where people used to be able to go into and have their noontime meal. Those are still being provided, but people have to go pick them up. But then there are also people who require and need assistance with a home delivered meal. And so those are delivered to clients in their homes as well. Other things like purchasing medications, equipment, supplies. So as I said, kind of in a nutshell, you can see how purchasing these kinds of things then helps someone maintain their independence, then that's the assistance we're providing. We're not meant to be a long-term service. So we're kind of like that Band-Aid. Let's get you connected to something that will then continue to help you in the long run. And so that's our goal, to help people then stabilize, get what it is that you need, so that we can then move on and help and assist others. But hoping with that effect that hopefully then what we connect you to and link you to is going to help solve and at least assist you in the long run.
So do people have to qualify financially for your help, or is it open to most seniors?
What I love about the organization is that basically the only requirements are that you are 60 and older and that you live in the service region. So that's really beneficial for us, especially here in our border town location, because there are people here, different circumstances, but as long as you meet age criteria and you are a resident here, you physically live here, if you will, that's qualifying. We don't have a means test or an income test. Again, if we're going to connect you to certain other programming, things like Medicaid, long-term care resources through the state, they do. And so then at that point, we would have and ask those kinds of questions. But for our services and to initiate assistance with us, age, and as long as you live in the service region, we can assist you.
Something we were discussing earlier before we turned on the recording. How is your agency operating right now because of COVID-19?
We are closed to the public. We are still here physically coming into the office. And so basically everything is done over the phone at this point. I'm not a fan of that. Obviously, being a social worker, we like to see people in their environments. We like to be with people, but COVID-19 restrictions prevent us from doing that. So we are conducting everything over the phone. If someone has a need, maybe they needed to bring in some kind of documentation or piece of information to further assist them, they can come to the office, but they're not allowed inside. So basically, we're trying to keep safe as well as keeping our staff safe and our older adults.
I know that when it comes to people having serious consequences from getting COVID-19, it's mostly the elderly, people over 75 or people over 65. Could you talk about some of the efforts of your agency in that area?
Sure. When the pandemic first hit, obviously we knew that, as you mentioned, seniors were the most vulnerable population and the most largely affected. So part of our efforts were calling those homebound or clients that were receiving our home delivered meal program. Those, because of the qualifying assessments, if you will, that are required to then assess that someone is homebound, made them for us maybe one of the more vulnerable, one of the more populations that would most likely be most isolated. And so we started calling them. We started having weekly connections to them just to check in, just to make sure that they were okay. We also connected with our local United Way to create what we call senior care kits. And so they had things like toilet paper and basic cleaning supplies, things like that. So connecting in that way, I think was beneficial at the start of the pandemic. Moving into now where we are today with the vaccines, again, working with our local elected officials, any of the city staff that are putting forth efforts to create the vaccination, the way things look now with our vaccines. We felt that we had to serve as an advocate to ensure that they remembered that processes that were put in place to help people register and in their minds streamline efforts to do so were not always conducive to older adults, in the sense that most don't have a computer. We know that things were being done online and are encouraged to be done online. We know that in our region, most older adults don't have a computer, they don't have access to the internet. They don't feel comfortable. And it's not to say that they can't do it, they just have never been put in that kind of a situation. So then in having those conversations, noting that this was the way they wanted to operate, then we knew that we had to at least try to serve. And so we are actively registering those older adults who do not have access to a computer, who don't have access to the internet. And then at the beginning, again, the basic requirement was an email address. And so again, we know that most older adults don't have email addresses. We're relying on adult children, grandchildren, et cetera, to help in that capacity. But again, some older adults don't have that. So we are trying to serve as that resource for them. We created a generic email address, and then someone calls in, they need assistance, we're registering them. But then that secondary piece means we're also having to manage the communication, because that is how the person becomes aware of when their vaccine appointment is set. So then having to follow up with that client and then inform them, this is when your appointment is, can you make it, can you not? So we've been trying our best to serve in that capacity. It seems to be working. To date, we've registered about 165 individuals and are managing those communications, for them on their behalf. And so it seems to be working, answering a lot of questions, just really overall concern, worry, for when that vaccine is coming, so that we know that there are so many older adults that are really just looking forward to this vaccine, which I'm grateful for. We know that in other parts of the state, my counterparts have stated people don't want the vaccine. And so there is much more demand here in El Paso County in our service region than there are in other parts of Texas. But that's a whole other conversation.
No, and I think that's great that you're there to serve as an advocate, because maybe whoever's in charge, if they've always had internet, they
Right.
might not think of the elderly. I know personally that I've tried to log in to some of those UMC, and they fill up in 5 minutes, and I'm logged
Yes.
in with 2 laptops, one
Mhm.
phone, and so I can't even imagine, and I think I'm a little bit techie, but I can't even imagine someone who's not, who's never had a computer in their life,
Right.
trying to navigate those systems. So
Mhm.
thank you for doing that for our elderly population. So that's fantastic. Um, and so staying on the topic of COVID, I know that um, for some people, for some grandparents, people have tried to avoid to visit them because they know that they're high risk, at least before the vaccines.
Right.
So could you talk about how to reach out to your seniors or the seniors in your family and also keep them safe at the same time?
Right. Well, we know that at the beginning, obviously, we were very much encouraging, phone contact at the very least. I think our biggest concern here, not just myself, but other staff members, we could hear the loneliness, can imagine the disconnection of having to isolate, not just for the older adult, but again, if you are a family caregiver, that's a difficult role to be in when you are already most likely being isolated, if you will, and caring for your loved one. Typically that happens, it's a natural process, not saying that it's correct or right, but as a caregiver, you're focused on your loved one and you're focused on their care. And so little by little, contact with the outside world as you used to know it maybe has become less and less. So with the pandemic, you were forced to isolate. And so that was very apparent to us when we would hear people on the phone saying how lonely they felt and how depressed they felt. So it was really important for us to encourage those caregivers to continue to reach out some way, but then our older adults to say, encourage them to reach out to their family, but maintaining that distance. I think now as we've seen this progress and are hopeful in the vaccines, definitely staying masked, wearing your mask, keeping that social distance obviously is important. But I think now we're able to see, maybe now we can see each other now. We can maybe be in the same room, if you will, if someone has been vaccinated. And so I think we're hopeful. We're definitely turning that corner, but we just continue to encourage people to stay connected somehow, over the phone. If you can and you're willing to learn, then obviously we want older adults to start to learn about technology that's available, like things like this, to be able to meet with family. And I agree. I think the more tech savvy you are, obviously it comes a little easier. But for some people, it's another thing to learn. And we have people that are not willing to, obviously they don't feel comfortable, but there are some older adults they're embracing this and they're learning. There's so many different ways to stay connected, if you will, even over a smartphone. So those are all things that we've encouraged people to at least do that, make sure that you're not isolating, because we know that there are studies that obviously isolation can lead to depression, which then leads to other health concerns.
And so you mentioned something important about the caregivers. So what kind of support are you offering to them? And I know from personal experience, taking care of my mom as she had terminal cancer. I know it was very depressing and lonely.
Mhm. Right.
So it would have been great to know that there's an agency that can help. What kind of things do you do for that community?
So again, everything's done over the phone. We have one staff member in particular that focuses on that outreach, education, support. So she is conducting one-on-one. If you need time to speak to her, then she can do that. We also have a curriculum called Caregiver Stress Busters. And this is a 9-week curriculum that, again, we're doing over the phone. We've had, a different experience, if you will. Some people just don't want to do the computer, this virtual, but phone, that's easier, that I can grasp. So she's conducting these classes. Again, it's called the Caregiver Stress Busters program. Very specific curriculum that was developed at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. And they are looking at how a caregiver can manage their own stress, their own burnout, to identify within themselves when they are getting to a place that's not healthy, if you will. There's 2 curriculums. One is specific to people who are caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease or related dementias. Again, it's a different kind of caregiving experience when you have to deal with that kind of an illness. And then there's one that's kind of a more generic overall, you're a caregiver, but it's not specific to the Alzheimer's or dementia related illnesses. And so with that, again, focusing on the needs of the caregiver, focusing on their stress level, so their own way of coping, to teach those coping skills, to teach stress reduction. And so it's a 9-week course that I think we've seen, we believe is helpful. But I think what's most comforting to us that we've seen as well is that out of that group, it has become a natural support group to each other. It's because you're talking to people in similar experiences. So you begin to share with one another, you begin to share experiences and not feel, that it's not normal to think, gosh, I hate my life right now. Some caregivers might, but that's not to say they don't love their person that they're caring for, that they're not. It's just a stressful life at that point. So I think the naturally occurring support that they serve each other then can continue past our involvement. And I think that's the beautiful thing that we've seen through this support. It's all over the phone, but at least we're trying to stay connected and encouraging others to connect themselves.
That's great. And thinking of my own, of my own friends that have aging parents, you talked about, so would people be able to go to your agency and find out which are the best nursing homes or family, daycares for adult daycares? Is that something that you would be able to provide guidance or tell them what to look for?
Sure. Particularly with long-term care facilities, obviously we can't make referrals, but we can connect you to rating websites that you can see where each long-term care facility has to be inspected at least once a year. And then depending on concerns that come up, this is through the state, they're licensed through the state of Texas. These facilities then have a report that is accessible online that one can see for themselves. We always tell people that if you're thinking of a particular facility, the best thing to do is go see, make an unannounced visit and say you'd like a tour. That's our best advice. Obviously with COVID restrictions right now, that's not possible sometimes, but at least with knowledge and then your firsthand information, that trying to guide, I think that's definitely something that we can help with. Even just having that conversation, because I think oftentimes we're having conversations with the guilt of having to make that decision of placement, and working through those feelings of what's best for your loved one, what would better serve your loved one, or admitting that I can't do this anymore as a caregiver. I'm hurting myself or I'm hurting my loved one. Those conversations where I think that's important also, just even that, and how to finance that. What are you going to qualify for? Those kind of conversations when you find yourself at that point. We can help at least facilitate those conversations and try to guide you in, like I said, we can't make a referral, but at least guide you and have the conversation to what's available.
Well, that's good to know, because I think a lot of people sometimes, if they're an only child, they might have to work, and so if a parent needs or a grandparent needs full-time care, that might be something that they might consider
Right.
as a last resort.
Mhm.
So speaking of qualifying and financial matters, I know anecdotally I've heard, um, and this is within my own family, right, that they don't apply for some services
Mhm.
because they feel uh, that the state will then take their home after they die. I
Mhm.
wanted to know whether or not that was true.
Well, it's definitely, they don't take your home. That definitely is a lost in translation. However, there is something called the Medicaid Estate Recovery Program, or MERP, MERP for short. If anyone's ever tried to apply for long-term care services and have been told that, that's what the program they're referring to. And what it is the state of Texas is recovering the cost of what they paid for your long-term care services to then basically recover that money into the coffers of Medicaid. And so for most people who qualify, obviously you're limited on the resources that you are able to have, so it's only so much in the bank. One car, one house, those are exempted. Anything outside of that would be considered a resource. Stocks and bonds, additional bank accounts, etc., would disqualify you financially for qualifying for a state-funded program like we're talking about. So when someone qualifies, most likely those persons, all they have is the home. So when this takes effect, the recovery piece of when this takes effect happens after the person has passed away. There are several exemptions that we try to discuss, have conversations on. There's a whole website, there's a whole division, if you will, at the state that deals with this recovery. And so people can explain those exemptions for you. But when you're told up front, when you're applying, that the Medicaid estate recovery clause will apply, sometimes that lost in translation is they're going to take my house. When in fact, after the person passes, prior to someone inheriting, the home, if you will, there's a list of debts, right? There are debtors against the person's estate that are going to basically come forward and say, where's my portion? One of those debtors is the state of Texas to say, we spent X amount of money on your care, and so now we expect this money reimbursed. And so when someone then has to pay back that debt and the only asset they have is the home, that is when the home then is sold to pay back the debt, if you will. And so in all of that very complicated explanation, sometimes it's easier to say someone, well, we'll just take your house at the end, when that's not the case. And unfortunately, I think that is the misconception that keeps many people from utilizing the long-term care resources that are available, because all they're thinking of is, I won't have my home. And it's so unfortunate. We try to combat that conversation so often, because again, that's usually the key to someone being able to stay in their home with those kinds of supports in place that we can't offer, and that we're trying to connect you to, because it's at a higher level, it's at a much higher rate of service, if you will, the amount of hours that someone can receive in their home with assistance and care. And so that's our dilemma. So thank you for asking that question, because that's something that I really wish people would understand, that it's not that they're going to take your home now, but eventually, most likely, the person who is in charge of your estate will most likely have to sell the home to pay the debt. Although there's exemptions that people don't think about as well. They just hear, my home was not going to go to my kids, or I want to leave something to my children, my grandchildren. And so those, again, the hard conversations of, but what you have now should serve you in order for you to stay in the home. Or, we've had conversations with adult children like, that's my inheritance. What do you mean? I'm not going to let my mom's house go to the state. Think, okay, well, that's fine. Are you willing to then pay for the services that your mom needs? And not unless we're rich, obviously we've not planned to have that extra expense. So again, encouraging people, use the resources that are available to you, even if that means that after you've passed, then you have a debt back to the state to then go back into the coffers that are going to help someone else. It doesn't happen often. El Paso County has a low recovery rate, but I'm not the expert in that. It's just what we've heard and what we've seen. Some of the exemptions are if there's a surviving spouse that's still in the home, then obviously they cannot sell the home because there's a surviving spouse. That's an exemption. An adult child that's lived there at least the last year of the person's life is now living in that home or has been living there. If they were to sell the home, that person becomes homeless. So it's things like that that really, again, going back and having those conversations with people to encourage them to apply for those services that sometimes, like you said, people don't apply for because of that fear. It's unfortunate because of that. So I hope I've clarified.
No, that's great to know about the exemptions, and we're kind of getting close to the end of time, and so I just wanted to maybe get your phone number, your agency's phone number, and we'll go ahead and put that on screen as well, because I think you're providing valuable services that maybe people don't know about. So how can they get a hold of the Area Agency on Aging?
Is 915-533-0998. And we're here Monday through Thursday, 8 to 4:30, and then on Fridays, 8 to noon. Our offices are located right by the airport off of Montana, between Hawkins and Airway. So we're kind of centrally located, although our geographics are changing, right? But I think we're fairly accessible, even though we're not taking people in the office at this point. Just know that the Area Agency on Aging is here to serve. Even if it's just answering questions or having the conversation, I think it's so important to start thinking about your aging process, to start planning. And if you need that guide or resource, we're here to serve in that capacity.